the domestic panel. So we will be addressing the dynamics, the domestic dynamics that emerged right after the election. So in March, Turkey held local elections, and the opposition captured a major, and some would call a historic victory against the AKP and President Erdogan. The opposition captured almost all major cities in Turkey, dealing a huge blow to Erdogan's 17-year rule. And there was a rerun elections in Istanbul a few months after, and there the AKP lost even by a larger margin. So now we have new dynamics on the ground. Erdogan is facing a host of problems, from an economic recession to discontent and divisions within his own party, and a more confident opposition. And Rushan Çakır here has called it the newest Turkey, if I could translate it that way, referring to Erdogan's new Turkey. So I would like to discuss here, the panelists will discuss different aspects of those new dynamics today. But before we begin, let me introduce the panelists. You have the booklet, the conference booklet, so you can take a look at their biography. So I'll just say a few words. Rushan Çakır, he's a dear friend, and he's an award-winning journalist, and he's the founder of the independent online news portal Medyascope. He has won journalism awards from various institutions, including from the International Press Institute. Thanks, Rushan. And we have Fehmi Koru, who is currently a freelance journalist in Turkey, and he's a columnist, and he has previously worked as the editor-in-chief of several Turkish newspapers. Thank you, Fehmi Bey, for coming. And Aykan Erdemir, he is a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, and he's a former member of the Turkish parliament from the main opposition, CHP. And then Giran Özcan, he is the Washington representative of the pro-Kurdish People's Democratic Party, the HDP. So thank you all again for coming, and I would like to start with you, Rushan, just to give us the general view. You have long made the argument that the heyday of Erdogan is over. He has lost his legitimacy, he has nothing new to say or to offer to the people, and it's all downhill from here. So my first question is, tell us how you reach that conclusion.
This is a little bit the story of Islamic movement in Turkey, but in general, there's the adventure of conservative people, religious conservative peoples, coming from periphery to the center of the system. And already the Republican area witnessed a little bit this, but with Erdogan, with AK Party, that was the final adventure, final trip from periphery. And that was really a big transformation and changement of power broker of the countries, changing the elites of the countries, etc. So that at the first time, that was a social movement plus political movement. But then, at the beginning, the movement was a collective mind movement with not only with Erdogan, but also so many different figures and so many institutions, so many Islamic institutions. And that was, Erdogan was the leader of all of this, but there used to be a kind of collective governance. And then, at the last 5 or 6 years, for myself, the turning point is Gezi events in Istanbul.
That was the popular protest in 2013.
And, but for somebody else, maybe a little bit earlier or a little bit later. But Erdogan became a little bit, the first motivation of Erdogan became a survival of himself, survival of his power. And as far as he was afraid of losing the power, he monopolized the power, he eliminated the other person, and during this process, he gave up so many important vision of this movement, and he replaced nationalism to Islamism, etc. So he became an authoritarian figure, and
So,
he
sorry,
became
just to clarify, he dropped Islamism and he started pursuing nationalism.
not absolutely, but he at the first time when Tayyip Erdogan was rising, he was not referring too much to nationalism. Instead, he was talking about the solving Kurdish question, etc. And so he was addressing to everybody, but of course, everybody, we knew that he was a conservative person, Islamist person, but he had a vision of Europe, vision of democracy, developed, advanced democracy, etc. But then he replaced freedom by the security, the same issue in everywhere. And he talked about the challenges coming from terrorists, etc. And this Gülenist movement really helped him to create another pretext of abolishing so many things. So that was, for myself, according to my analysis, I was saying that for the last 3 or 4 years, he already lost, but nobody was winning. And Turkey was waiting for the winner. And the last election, the municipal election, showed us that Tayyip Erdogan is not invincible. And people can win him. And in this issue, there are so many different aspects of the opposition. First, there was an alliance of center-left, center-right, plus Kurdish movement. But Kurdish movement participation of the alliance was not direct and was not open, but covered one. And fresh candidates, new figures as candidates. And these people were mayor of small neighborhoods or small districts of big cities. And they had some kind of experiments, but not a big one. And they challenged the metropolitan, the biggest cities mayorship, and they won it. And I think that the main issue, these people, during their campaign, the candidates and the political parties, they didn't address to Erdogan. The last 20 years maybe, or 15 years of Turkey was Erdogan in power and some people, opposition, who was attacking Erdogan as person. And people always, or opposition figures always were describing Erdogan, who is responsible of every bad things, but they were not providing any solution. And in this last election, we witnessed some candidates, some political parties who were not discussing with Erdogan, who were not preferring the polemics with Erdogan,
so
ideological
they didn't engage him directly, and instead they addressed the larger
Instead
question.
of engaging directly, they addressed to everybody. They addressed to everybody, and they try to be a little bit over polarization. Erdogan is, the polarization of Turkey is very good for Erdogan because, in general, Turkey is a conservative country. If there is a fight between, let's say, Muslim or pious Muslim and secular-minded people, all the time is sure that this pious Muslim will win. But if you don't accept the game between this pious Muslim and the secular, instead, if you are focusing on what to do, how to do, providing services to Istanbul citizen or Ankara citizen, and they show that it may work. And don't forget that after 25 years, Erdogan lost Istanbul and Ankara. Istanbul and Ankara, the first and second cities. So this is really a disaster for him. as Gönül said, that he didn't want to accept the failure, and he had repeated the election of Istanbul again some months later, and then
Lost by
in
a
the
bigger margin.
June, that was a bigger fiasco for himself. So it shows us that I think people are tired in general, are tired of Erdogan, but now with this municipal election, they realize that some new or brand new Turkey might be possible without Erdogan, and Turkey is not condemned to Erdogan. Okay?
So that is a very optimistic, which I share, view of what's happening on the ground. You're making the argument that this is the beginning of the end for Erdogan. And if, Aykan, I want to turn to you. If people like Rushan and many others can talk about a new era in Turkish politics, it's mainly because of the opposition victory in both March and later in June. And we are not really used to seeing the main opposition, CHP, perform well in elections. And in fact, for a long time, those who were trying to make sense of Turkish politics have argued that Turkey did not have an Erdogan problem, but it had an opposition problem, meaning that Erdogan wields so much power, not because he has a magic formula that addresses voters' major problems, but because there is no effective opposition. That's always been the argument. But it seems like the opposition finally got its act together. And my question to you is, how did that happen? What was the winning formula for the CHP? As someone who have come from that background and knows the CHP very well.
You know, in politics, defeat has no owners, but is orphan. But victory has many partners. So once you have a victory, you have a lot of individuals and institutions who would like to take ownership. So this too, I think, has been a process in the making. I would like to argue that it started in 2010 with Kılıçdaroğlu's rise to leadership. And this has been in the making over the last 9 years. In 2010, when Kılıçdaroğlu came to the leadership position in CHP,
Kılıçdaroğlu is the current leader of the CHP.
Current leader of the pro-secular Social Democratic Republican People's Party, CHP. His motto was CHP for everyone. Herkes için CHP. Which is easier said than done, right? How do you turn a party, transform a party known for its kind of more nationalist, rigid, secular, and old school left ways into a kind of a contemporary, kind of more Euro social democratic party. And his key goal, right from the very start, was opening the party up to members, opening the party up to centrist and center-right voters, opening the party up to reaching out to Kurds, reaching out to Turkey's religious segments. So that's the long story. But then, of course, there is a more, let's say, timely part of this story. That's the 2019 part of this story. And again, let me put on my former academic hat here. In our political anthropology classes, one of the key subject matters we dwell on is unintended consequences. In fact, we sometimes joke that that's what political anthropology is about, the unintended consequences of policymaking. And what laid the groundwork for the 2019 victory of the opposition is actually the odd alliance between the MHP, far-right MHP, or ultra-nationalist MHP, the Nationalist Action Party, and the ruling AKP. Because if it weren't for their design of introducing a legal framework for putting together alliances, electoral alliances, the opposition wouldn't have had the legal institutional framework for putting together formal alliances. Now, you might wonder, why did Erdogan suddenly, after all these years, came up with a plan to allow that? It was basically to save the ultra-nationalist MHP. Erdogan needed MHP's votes, and MHP was afraid of, in the previous general elections, of remaining below the 10% national threshold. So this alliance was tailor-made for the AKP-MHP coalition. But then, that's the unintended consequence. Once you present yourself with a legal, institutional, regulatory framework, others will take advantage of it. And CHP and the pro-Kurdish HDP and the splinter E party, Good Party, you know, the center-right nationalist splinter from the ultra-nationalist MHP, they took advantage of this. And so that's the broader context. But then, what are the more concrete constituent elements of this victory? Let me walk you through very quickly. These are all necessary but not sufficient conditions. None of these alone would have made the difference. Now, the most important one is definitely the support of the pro-Kurdish HDP party. I always start with this because let us not fool ourselves. The CHP could have done everything right. If you take out the pro-Kurdish votes, CHP wouldn't have won Istanbul, wouldn't have won Mersin, wouldn't have won Adana.
These are all big, major
These are the
Turkish
big
cities.
metropolitan centers. Possibly it could still have won Ankara, possibly Antalya and Izmir, but not these other metropolitan centers. So the pro-Kurdish HDP's support is crucial. But again, it's necessary but not sufficient. Why? Alone, HDP support wouldn't have sufficed. What else is necessary? And by the way, the reason I'm saying it's not sufficient is because in the first run of Istanbul elections, as you remember, it was a very narrow victory for the opposition. So it was not just the pro-Kurdish votes that mattered, but also that every single vote that the CHP campaign, that the candidate, the way of reaching out, ballot box observers, it all mattered. This is yet again a great lesson in politics, that every single vote going in to the ballot box and coming out to be counted matters. And so the candidate, of course, is very important. On the one hand, you had what was perceived as a lethargic kind of crony of Erdogan, right? Yildirim. Versus a
Former prime minister.
Former prime minister. Versus a young, dynamic candidate who was quite a miracle candidate. Why? We're talking about a candidate from the eastern Black Sea coast, Erdogan's own support base, from a family with center-right, conservative, and some nationalist roots. So he's well-versed in, let's say, what constitutes 60 to 65% of Turkish politics. But he has impeccable social democratic and secular credentials. But at the same time, secular in the true sense of the word secular, meaning he is a pious Muslim who believes in the separation of state and church, state and mosque, and who has very good credentials with Turkey's both pro-secular and pious populations. So he was the miracle candidate, and the last name even helps, İmamoğlu, son of an imam. How could Erdogan challenge the religious credentials of the son of an imam? So that was there too. And ballot box monitoring matters too, because İmamoğlu had also a miracle provincial chair in Istanbul, Canan Kaftancıoğlu, who again is young, dynamic, very liberal, reaches out to the youth via social media, but most importantly, a great organizer. She is someone, as we say in Turkish, from the streets. She is a politician of the streets, of social movements, which means she can put together the most effective mechanism that can withstand the Erdogan machine's pressure and hold on to the votes. And we have seen into the early hours of the next day, into Monday, how the ballot box battles mattered. If it weren't for Canan Kaftancıoğlu's resistance apparatus at the ballot box, the elections would have been lost as well. And then, ideas matters. As someone who believes ideas matters, political discourse matters, we have to keep into account two different sides to this. On the one hand, we have what's now known in the West as the Book of Radical Love. This is Ateş İlyas Başsoy, who wrote a short pamphlet that the CHP used to train all of its chapters around the country, all of its members around the country. It was to love the people who love and vote for your adversary in politics. It would be akin to love the Trump voters in the US. So it was love.
Which we could use here.
So love the Erdogan voters and reach out to them. Now you might argue Ateş İlyas Başsoy wasn't necessarily in charge of the Istanbul campaign, but think about it. Istanbul elections is always about Turkish elections, meaning because provincial ties still matter a lot in Turkish local elections, the way in which people vote in Istanbul is shaped also very much by the way in which people vote all around the country. All these familial connections matter a lot. So if you don't treat everyone right in 81 provinces around the country in Turkey, you also don't win the votes in Istanbul. So the Book of Love matters because CHP members were trained to reach out to Kurds and Arabs and Alevis and Sunnis and seculars and pious and the center-right and the center-left in this all-embracing matter. And keep in mind, it was not just a miracle of a pamphlet. This is 9 years in the making. I worked very closely with Kılıçdaroğlu at the CHP headquarters. This is his worldview. This is what he has been preaching for since the day he assumed office. This is CHP for everyone. CHP should be able to enter every single home, literally. I was not only representing Bursa, a northwest industrial city, I was also a volunteer lawmaker for the city of Batman, a Kurdish and Arab majority city, and where CHP had the lowest votes. I picked a province. It was where we performed worst because we had horrible appeal among the Kurds and among the pious populations, and our goal was to make sure we are welcome within the homes of the Kurds and Arabs and the pious and the conservative segments of the society. So this is a 9-year-long story, and of course Necati Özkan, who was managing the campaign in Istanbul, also matters. He's again, a dynamic person, very open-minded, trying to bridge the gap between, the CHP and European social democratic parties. So all of these factors came together and led to the miracle. But allow me to add one footnote, because no success is just your own success. It's also someone else's failure. So the CHP has to thank Erdogan, but more importantly, Erdogan's inner circle, which is increasingly comprised of incompetent yes men. And thanks to those yes men, Erdogan's campaign was about, first of all, beka sorunu, existential threat, and Turkish electorate hates that. You can't securitize a local election. Second, they turned the campaign into a smear campaign called İmamoğlu is Pontian. He's crypto-Greek. He's crypto-Christian. And again, that was a brilliant way of offending all of our Black Sea voters, meaning pushing them from the AKP toward the CHP. So again, thanks to Erdogan's yes man. And also the economic mismanagement of Erdogan's son-in-law. The disastrous consequences of an incompetent finance minister's policies helped the opposition a lot. So there were also disgruntled voters who said it's the economy stupid. And finally, I would say before the revote, a last-minute attempt to try to bring in Öcalan to the ballot box.
The
That is,
jailed leader of the
jailed leader of the
PKK.
PKK, Kurdistan Workers' Party, which was a very interesting move. You know, when you think about it, ultra-nationalist MHP agreeing to allow the Öcalan to share a message to discourage the HDP voters from voting for the alliance, and it backfired too. So I would argue only and only when you put all of these factors together, the great chain of successes on the part of the entire opposition, not just the CHP, it was the entire opposition bloc, and all the chain of horrible mistakes on the part of Erdogan's incompetent inner circle of yes men. And I know I'm using a sexist term by yes men, but it's almost all men. And we thank them for alienating Kurds and the underclasses, the Black Sea people. It's basically they alienated the entire spectrum of politics, and that gave Turkey not just a new set of mayors, but it also gave Turkey hope and a new paradigm of politics that is post-populist, that is no more about polarization, but it's about building bridges, it's about embracing difference, and it's about, I guess, going back to Roshan, the newest Turkey. So new Turkey is now passé. Erdogan's new Turkey is passé. There is a newer Turkey, and I think that's still the goal in the run-up to the presidential elections, whenever that is.
Well, I want to bring Iran in here because we, as Aykan mentioned, Kurdish support played the most critical role in the opposition's victory. The overwhelming majority of Kurds supported the opposition. And my question to you is, why did the Kurds support the opposition, which was an alliance of the CHP and nationalists? Aykan mentioned when he was talking about the reasons for the success of the CHP, he talked about the importance of ideas. And I agree with you that the CHP has taken steps in the right direction in terms of recognizing the Kurdish question and offering a somewhat modified version of a peaceful resolution for the peaceful resolution of the Kurdish of the Kurdish problem. But I suspect there must still be a lot of skepticism among the Kurds vis-a-vis the CHP when it comes to whether the CHP can offer a peaceful alternative. Because remember, there is a strong nationalist current within the CHP as well that has until now prevented the CHP from taking meaningful steps in terms of addressing the Kurdish question, embracing the Kurds very openly. So even when they were putting together the coalition, the opposition coalition, the HDP was not part of the formal coalition. They were a de facto partner of the coalition, meaning that in some places, for instance, the pro-Kurdish party did not field candidates in favor of the opposition, and in other places, the CHP, the pro-Kurdish party asked its supporters to vote for the opposition, so it worked. And yet, they were still kept out of the formal opposition, which to me suggests that it's still not politically safe for the main opposition party to completely embrace the Kurds. Which brings me to my question. So, how do the Kurds feel about this? Do they think that this is the right tactical move? What was their strategy ahead of the elections?
So let me start by saying that we've already heard now until now from both Mr. Çakır and Mr. Erdemir that the Kurds and the HDP were both indirectly involved, and as Gönül just explained as well, were indirectly involved, but were also, were credited significantly with the victory in the local elections as well. And I think it's my job now to explain how both of these are actually right. Because The HDP's election strategy, and I know that's sometimes used as, synonymously with the Kurdish vote, which is probably a discussion for another time, but I'll take that on right now and say that for us, going into the local elections, it was all about dealing a blow to this whole nationalist alliance that has taken over Turkey, spearheaded by Erdogan right now. And we needed to significantly deal him a blow to try and see if we can shake things up in Turkey's political landscape. And so going into the elections, we were never officially part of the opposition camp. That's mainly because the opposition camp were not able to incorporate us for their own political reasons. But we as the HDP believe that the Kurdish issue, the Kurdish question in Turkey, is positively correlated to the standard of democracy and human rights in Turkey in general. So for us, dealing a blow to Erdogan and this nationalist alliance and this authoritarian downturn in Turkey was the main goal. And the local elections threw us the perfect opportunity to be able to do that, because we've seen in Turkey in the past that when Turkey democratizes, the Kurds benefit. When Turkey goes down on this authoritarian downturn and this democratic backsliding, then we Kurds generally bear the brunt of the burden. And so this was an ideal opportunity for us to be able to shake things up. And thankfully, the CHP, which Mr. Erdemir just outlined as well, they fielded candidates and ran a campaign that really made our job pretty easy in a lot of the places, because we had candidates that weren't very well known, and this was only a good thing for us Kurds. I mean, for example, in Istanbul, Mr. İmamoğlu ran an almost perfect campaign. And for the first time, I think, in a lot of places in Turkey, the voters were given two very clear roads ahead. One was the AKP's road that, for the last few years at least, has been one of significant polarization, the language of love and just raising tension in society to unbearable levels. And then we had this, in Istanbul at least, we had this guy that was talking the language of love and reconciliation. And for the first time, we had two clear options and a direction that people were presented with. And thankfully, a lot of people in Istanbul opted for the language of love and reconciliation to go forward. And this made our job as the HDP very easy to be able to mobilize our base to go out and say, well, one path is leading to destruction, leading to mass deaths and destruction of whole Kurdish towns and cities, which has occurred over the past few years, especially in the Kurdish regions. And the other side is at least talking the talk, and is at least providing an alternative to this dark direction that Erdogan has taken. Now, in the aftermath, once we were able to mobilize our base, and I think the election strategy that the HDP took on was perfectly implemented and successful on the day, on both days. And I think everyone saw that we were able to take our base, almost all of our base, to the ballot box to support, I'll change that, not to support, but to deal Erdogan this defeat. And so, in the run-up to the elections, there was a lot of talk about whether the Kurds and the HDP will be kingmakers. And I never liked that term from the beginning, because I think rather than making a king, we took the crown off one of them and actually ran off with it. And I wouldn't go so far as to say that we dethroned him, not quite yet, but we definitely dealt a significant blow, and this was our strategy going in. So, as all political parties do, I think we scored a very significant success in the local elections. Now, in the aftermath, going in with this strategy, in the aftermath, we saw that rather than Erdogan taking a hint and seeing that this road, this path to authoritarianism is not a good one and it's not winning at the ballot box, he went full steam ahead in this authoritarian path that he's chosen. And since the local elections, we as the HDP, for example, have had more than 20 local councils municipalities seized. These were municipalities that we only won about 6 months ago in the local elections that we're talking about right now. We've had more than 30 co-mayors removed from office and replaced with government-appointed trustees. Now, Erdogan's backlash and revenge, I think we can call it revenge, against the Kurds and the HDP hasn't remained within the borders of Turkey. And we see that this invasion into northern Syria and the attack against the Syrian Kurds is not only an extension of Erdogan's own domestic woes, but it's also revenge against the Kurds in Syria, and whose cousins only a few months back dealt him this significant electoral defeat domestically. So just to sum up, I think our strategy in the very short term was implemented perfectly into the run-up to the local elections and on the local elections. But it seems that in the medium to long term, we're seeing, the way we're seeing things unfold, I think in the second round of questions as well, we'll be able to analyze if in the medium and long term this was a successful strategy and if it has actually paid off for the Kurds and the HDP. Because although with the candidates that were declared and the campaign that the main opposition party conducted made it easy for us to mobilize our base, in what's unfolded after the local elections, that seems like it would be so much more difficult to do now again.
I want to come back to the Turkey-Syrian incursion and the developments after that. But now I want to ask Fehmi Bey about the new parties. That's one significant challenge that President Erdogan is facing at the moment. There are at least two potential new parties that will be launched at the end of this month. One is by Ali Babacan, who has been very close to Erdogan, served as a minister, and then we have Ahmet Davutoğlu, the former foreign minister and prime minister, who is about to launch his own party. And that is a significant challenge, and that is something that we have not seen before. This has, despite all the ups and downs, the AKP remained united pretty much. There were people who left the party, the founders, but it didn't really cause much traction. So this is a new development, and President Erdogan is probably very worried about that. So my question is, with regards to the timing first, I mean, yes, it makes sense to launch these parties after a significant loss, electoral loss. So the timing is, do you think it's right? And also, which one of these parties have more credibility, given Ahmet Davutoğlu just recently decided to jump ship? He was, whatever the state of Turkish democracy is in at the moment, Ahmet Davutoğlu until very recently played a very important role in where Turkey is now. So is this gonna be a huge problem for him moving forward? Because that's a large baggage. And also Ali Babacan's party. What is the profile of these two parties? Who are they hoping to capture votes from? So just a general idea of the profile of those parties.
Thank you very much. But before going into that part of our discussion, let me begin with something different. Whenever I'm faced with questions about Turkey of today, the questions themselves are all negative. Or whenever I read about Turkey in papers, they are also very negative. And some of the negative criticisms we heard today with the esteemed panelists. But I have to start saying something that I really strongly believe. Whatever wrongs we discuss among ourselves or hear from people from outside, they are all wrong. But to think that the AK party, founded on the wrong assumptions, have done everything wrong, I think this is wrong. AK party established with very good intentions and tried to do something real good. And it was really successful in many fields that tried to achieve. Some of them you mentioned, Gönül Hanım, in your presentation. But they also, I believe, worthy of mentioning once more for emphasis. For example, Turkish economy. AK party was established right after we experienced a very difficult economic crisis. We have been stripped of maybe half of our what we had until that time, 2000 and 2001. AK party took up that issue and tried to make the Turkish economy in a better. And it was successful. I remember until 2005, we had Turkish lira with 5 zeros, and they decided to get rid of those zeros. At that time, Turkish lira was almost equal to $1 US. And thanks to the able people in the economic field, we experienced really a good economy, and Turkey started to attract direct and indirect investments from outside. Not only economy was good, but also some other areas also taken care of. I remember many issues when AK party was established. People started to expect those in the core of the party, because the core of the party was coming from Islamically oriented parties of the past. They always expected that they would do something which would alienate Turkey from the West. But at the inception of the party, they had decided that Turkey has to turn its face to the West. And the European Union issue, for example, Turkey had an agreement with the European Union since the beginning of the Union. We signed an agreement with the Union at the early 60s. When Greece applied for a full membership, Turkey didn't apply at the same time, which was expected of Turkey. Why? Because the politicians running Turkey at that time felt that Islamic opposition didn't like this, and this was one of the reasons, of course, but very strong reason. And they remained aloof from the European Union at that time. The AK party members, founding members, were from that inclination, but they decided at the establishing in their party, in the first day even, that we have to have a full membership with the European Union. And they succeeded this. I mean, up to a point, of course, at the end of 2004, after after working very hard with the European Union, and at the end of 2004, Brussels accepted Turkey as a candidate for full membership. This was a success, really, and we had some chronic problems with the Kurds, with Alevites, with Armenians. This is only the few of our chronic problems, but all of them were taken by the AK party at the time. Kurdish issue, I remember ourselves, and Rushan was also with us, when the President Gül, traveling to Iran, he said, when we were discussing the Kurdish problem and the terror, he said, well, everything will be better and you have to expect something good. Afterwards, the Kurdish peace process started. And up to that point, in Turkey, Kurdish language was really unacceptable. Even the Kurdish songs was forbidden to sing. But with the accepting an opening to the Kurds, we have now state television, 24-hour broadcasting in Turkish, including the songs in Kurdish. And the idea of opening up to Turkey, to the Kurds, very well established right now. The same even started with the Armenians. I remember also President Gül taking the opportunity of two countries' national teams match, soccer match. He visited Yerevan, and together with the president of Armenia, Sarkisyan, when they were watching the match, they were also discussing how can they solve the Armenian problem. Cyprus issue, for example, which was really chronic up to that point, and when the United Nations Secretary General Kofi Annan drew a peace agreement between two sides and put this into referendum, the Greek side went against this and voted no. At the same time, Turkish side, taking their cue from the Ankara government, voted all yes, overwhelmingly, maybe 75% of the votes. And the secular approach to the matters also started and adopted by the AK party at that time. I remember, for example, when the Arab Spring started, our Prime Minister, now the President Tayyip Erdogan, went to Egypt, Cairo, and Morsi was the President of Egypt at that time, and Muslim Brotherhood was in the government of Egypt. He said that Egypt also should take up the issue of secularism, to the dismay of many maybe in the audience. But he said this. And so all these things together made the idea that the AK party really can be a model for many countries in the region.
But something went wrong.
Yeah. Something went wrong drastically, actually, afterwards. So I have to divide the AK party's rule into at least two phases. One until 2010, maybe 2012, maybe 2015, whatever side you are looking at the things. But at least 10 years was okay. For the last 3-4 years, we have had a lot of problems that deserve of criticism very harshly. In between, there is a phase. We didn't understand what is happening, but something, deviation from the right path, started at that time. Maybe in 2010 is the beginning of this phase. What happened in 2010? We had a referendum. You mentioned also in your presentation. And people voted overwhelmingly for passing that referendum. 58% of the votes went to yes. I think this is the first time the leadership of the party started to think that that is the way to do. We are strong. We are human right now. And we don't need any other help, but we can easily solve the problem of severe opposition to us by siding with the people. 58% of the votes. But afterwards, when the AK party started in politics in 2001, the very first election it entered, it got only 35%. 2007, that 35% became almost 50% in that election. And 2010, 58% in the referendum. But following elections, the AK party started to lose votes. In 2015, the June election, it got only 41.5% of the votes. And I believe Erdogan started to think that we are losing something.
Yes,
And he needed backup, and MHP, the Nationalist Party, came to his rescue. Up to that time, MHP was very much against the presidential system, but accepted it afterwards. And they were also against the existence of Erdogan as a president in the presidential system. They accepted it, and everything changed afterwards. So why the new parties are emerging right now? Because of this situation. I mean, the AK party was very successful in many fields, but started to lose some votes because the people are started feeling that something amiss, something they are losing. And the people abstaining from AK party it started to do many things which would alienate it from the masses. MHP, as a partner in power, also the ideas of AK party in its inception were lost. Inside the AK party, many leaders are no longer inside the party, using the term of Erdogan. They either pushed from the train or they themselves descended from the train. Some of them, like Abdullah Gül, the former president of Republic, and Ali Babacan, who was the motivator behind economic success of this country, and many others in different positions within the party, became restless and couldn't reach to the public by criticizing the party policies, they decided to form a new party. That's the reason, I believe, we have now at least why Babacan is trying to form a party. Davutoğlu is another story. He was the prime minister after Erdogan became the president, and he had an eye on presidency. If Erdogan completes his term in the presidency, he believed that he would take over his place. But Erdogan had different ideas in his mind, and he got rid of him. I believe both parties have some backing within the grassroots of both AK party or people who didn't vote AK party until now. Davutoğlu was aiming at AK party constituents. Babacan has a larger audience in his mind. He doesn't take any idea that he would have to address at AK party supporters. He would like to get as many as people who are new to the politics, with only a few of his friends from the AK party. But new faces will be the dominator of the new party of Babacan. Davutoğlu have some people from his previous time as prime minister, because he elected some of the members of parliament at that time. Now they are out of AK party. So he's building his party with the ex-MPs of AKP mainly. Also local governors of the AK party in his time. We have a new opening, and I believe this is the way we will encounter in the future. According to opinion polls, both parties attracting almost 10% each.
Davutoğlu's party too?
Yes, both parties are attracting that many. Although they are not, there isn't any party in the offing right now. After the new party is emerging, I believe they committed themselves that they would do this before the end of this month. So I believe the real expectations towards those parties will be understood at that time.
Okay, well, we have 4 minutes for the second round, so I'm going to ask you to be very brief in your answer so we can ask the audience to join us. So very briefly, I know this is a tough question to be brief about, Rushan, but you said that the failure that we're seeing today in Turkey is not just the failure of Erdogan, but also failure of Islamism. So my question is, having lived under an Islamist-ruled party for 17 years, how do people view, the pious people view Islamism and Islam after?
In Turkey,
and you have 1 minute to answer that question.
Political Islam was used to be monopolized by AK Party, and AK Party's failed, as we see. Social Islam was used to be monopolized by Gülen community, and they lost. And now we have a big crisis in political and social aspect of Islam. And other Islamic communities, they can survive in Turkey if they submit to Erdogan. And Erdogan distributes some material advantages to these communities. And these communities, most of them, became really very corrupted and directly related to the power. And
dependent on the government.
Yeah. And so the failure of Erdogan means also the failures of this. And in this respect, there are so many analyses of about this, the tendency among young people, including from the pious families, tendency of deism and atheism. So this is really very discussed. And recently, Tayyip Erdogan also in this about the religion conference, he also confessed this observation. So that I think that the amount of AK Party or Erdogan's one-man rules is a failure of not only Islamism, not only political Islam, but also Islam as religion. So, so many people who are not Islamic, they are happy of this consequence. But I think that Erdogan tried to Islamize the country from the state, but he made he didn't dream that he would make bad things to Islam. But I think that I observed that Islam is a religion, and Muslims in general, they are losing. But people observe that now there is a dominance of Islam and Islamism, but that's not true. And I think that mid-term, we would observe that Turkey would be more secular country.
That public opinion poll suggesting that there is a decline in religiosity particularly among the children of pious families. I think it's very striking. And thank you, good job on the timing. I expect you to perform as well as Rushan. So my second question to you is, moving forward, if the CHP wants to have a real shot in 2023 presidential elections, it really has to capture the Kurdish votes, right? And but the CHP's support for Erdogan's most recent military incursion into northeastern Syria have alienated the Kurdish voters. So the question is there a CHP strategy to win them back before 2023? And very briefly.
So Erdogan is a political mastermind. His incursion into northeast Syria, I think, was mainly driven by domestic factors, and at the top of that list is the attempt to drive a wedge within this winning coalition, particularly the pro-Kurdish voters and the rest of the coalition, and of course specifically the CHP. And so far some damage has been done. The challenge is for the CHP to articulate a third option, a different policy rhetoric concerning northern Syria. What could the CHP have done? I think CHP could have articulated better a different comprehensive security understanding. Opposing MHP, AKP coalition's state-centric security, the CHP could have raised all the issues with, crimes against humanity and war crimes, Turkey's use of proxies, and so on and so forth. So that's just one part of the equation. That is how to articulate a more nuanced policy position without alienating the center-right and nationalist voters.
That's a tall order.
That's a tall order. And the second issue is, this could be easier done because we know politics is also local. It's not just always about at the macro level. Municipalities matter a lot. And İmamoğlu has shown remarkable flexibility in reaching out to ethnic and religious minorities. So the CHP could use its hold control of metropolitan municipalities for what I call a de facto centralization. That is, Turkish citizens, especially Kurdish citizens of Turkey, could experience two different service delivery. Erdogan's, securitized, criminalized, kind of tough nationalist state versus CHP-run municipalities which are inclusive and all-embracing. which, as İmamoğlu has promised, offers Kurdish language classes, service provision in Kurdish, and not just Kurdish, all other languages. Just today, we learned from İmamoğlu's English Twitter account that he hired 50 faith leaders from different religions to offer all-inclusive religious services through municipalities' Directorate of Cemeteries. So funeral services are now all-inclusive, including Alevi, and there was even a Catholic kind of priest hired. So this could be the pattern, that is CHP through municipalities use the time until 2023 to prove to the Kurdish voters and the Arab voters and the biased voters that it will remain an inclusive, all-embracing party, not just in rhetoric, as Giran said, but also in practice.
But that will be avoiding the big picture, meaning the CHP is a party competing for national elections. They have to have a real Kurdish policy. So doing things at the local level works, but what about the big picture? And I want to ask Giran, so I know the Kurds are pissed. They're pissed that the CHP didn't return the favor, and even İmamoğlu, he backed the military incursion. So what does it take for the Kurds to back the opposition again in 2023? Are you satisfied with ICAN's solution?
Okay, so we are a political party that isn't just in opposition to the government of Turkey. We come from a long line of political predecessors that are actually opposed to certain genetic components in the DNA of the Republic of Turkey. And so, for example, what Mr. Koru said about certain bits of progress on the Kurdish issue, which is definitely true, but right now in Turkey, still, to be a Kurd, constitutionally, to be a Kurd, you have to accept that you're Turkish first. And still, even today, across Turkey, you're still banned from naming your child a Kurdish name if it contains letters in the Kurdish alphabet that the Turkish alphabet just doesn't have, such as X or W. And so, while certain bits of progress have been made, there's still a long way to go. So we're looking for partners within the political spectrum in Turkey who are willing and open to the discussion of existentially redefining the Republic of Turkey. Unfortunately, the most disappointing thing for the Kurds has been that the most progressive person to date on these issues is now the one that's animated with genocidal intent against the Kurdish people. And that's a very worrying thing for the state of affairs in Turkish politics in general. And so, especially with the last invasion into northern Syria and the attacks against the Kurds, both domestically and in Syria, we've seen that the Turkish opposition right now isn't quite ready to transcend itself when it comes to the Kurdish issue.
So you're not going to support them?
I will definitely not say that right now, but I think the bar, both fortunately and unfortunately, is set very low now for someone to come in and win the hearts and minds of both the Kurds and the Turks in Turkey. Unfortunately, no one's willing to take up the mantle just yet.
Okay, Fehmi Bey, apparently the Kurdish question is the burning question facing Turkish democracy. We have many others, but I still think that the Kurdish problem sits at the heart of it. So my question to you is, where do these new parties stand on that question?
Well, actually, whenever they have the opportunity to speak about the country's problems, both leaders, Davutoğlu and Babacan, voice their ideas about this problem. We know that Davutoğlu had a 15-page memorandum, and in that he says that these kind of problems, including the Kurdish problem, will be solved by peaceful means. Babacan himself didn't say anything about, didn't delve into this matter, but he also said that on his new TV program, he appeared on Habertürk, and he discussed these kind of matters very openly with the channel, and he said this Kurdish problem now is in a declining phase because of many other problems arising from the same problem, especially after the incursion to Syria. But also this has to be solved. Why what we had started starting with 2009. So I think these two new ventures will side with the peaceful solution and try to do maybe what the Kurdish side want them to do.
Okay, great. So we can now take questions from the audience. Please wait for the mic and identify yourselves. And for the sake of time, please ask a question.
I'm Ömer Taşpınar with National Defense University in Brookings. Fehmi Bey, my question is to you. Thank you very much for reminding us what the AKP has done right earlier on, at least for the first 10 years. I know Gönül tries hard to bring AKP, pro-AKP people to panels, and somehow they're reluctant to engage. Even pro-AKP think tanks refuse to participate. So it's important for us to remember that although some of the criticism, perhaps most of the criticism that Erdogan receives in the West today is deserved, there is also a kind of tendency to see him as a dictator. And we tend to forget that he remains, after 17 years of power in Turkey, by far the most popular politician in the country, and is still winning elections. And I believe that he wins elections mainly because of the economy. And he won elections mainly because of the economy, and his demise now, his declining popularity, is related to the declining economy. So we don't have an economist in this panel, but you follow the economy closely. And despite the recession in Turkey, my sense is that the problem is essentially a private sector debt problem, and that the public sector to GDP ratio is still very low in Turkey. So the public sector can spend money. Inflation is getting higher, people feel poorer, but overall, my sense is that Erdogan still believes he can win another election if the economy was to grow by 5–6%. And this is why he's so keen on keeping interest rates low, on public spending, and trying to control the central bank. Do you agree that he can still win an election if the economy somehow in the next 3 years recovers and Turkey starts growing again by 4–5%? And I ask this because he never lost an election when consumer confidence was high. And whenever his party and himself received lower than 40%, it was always because consumer confidence was low. So do you still see that he has a chance in the next election if the economy somehow recovers, despite all the things that we've been talking about the democracy?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's collect a few and then you can answer. Is that okay? So there was another question there. The gentleman in the back in the blue suit. Yeah.
I have several questions, so you may want to come back to me.
No, please, one question.
Just
Pick your
one
favorite.
question?
Just one.
Okay, which one is the most important? It might digress because these are walking in slowly to the most important question.
Maybe we can ask the other gentleman while you decide on your question. So the gentleman next to him.
Okay, will I have an opportunity to speak?
Of course, to ask a question.
I'm Peter Humphrey, an intelligence analyst and a former diplomat. Just want to know what the specifics of CHP promises are on the international affairs front that will make Turkey's direction either different or maybe even reverse Erdogan's actions to this date.
Great, thank you. And
Hi, my name's Shahid Khan. I cover Turkey for the Commerce Department. One of the questions that I had was that with the rising inflation that we have and the central bank independence that's being threatened, Are there any policies that would be put forward in order to protect the central bank, or any economic policies in order to prevent, I guess, the rising inflation that we end up seeing? Thank you.
Thank you. Yep, sir.
Is Erdogan seen as a commander for life during the waving economy?
Can you identify yourself?
Oh, I'm sorry. My name is Neil Garver. I'm an information specialist with the government. When are the next national elections, regional elections, and local elections?
Sorry, what is the question again? Is
What,
Erdogan...
that was my second question.
Okay, I missed your first question.
My first question was, Erdogan is Erdogan seen as a commander for life in a waving economy that vacillates?
Okay.
We know that there's a 2023 election.
Okay, and your second question is?
My second question is,
Okay, well, we can come back to you later. So let the panel answer the questions, and then we'll go another round. So there was a question to you, Fehmi Bey, on the economy. There were two questions on economy. And then, Aykan, there was a question about the CHP and CHP's foreign policy, whether they can reverse what Erdogan has done. And maybe you could take the last question, which is Erdogan going to be there forever? That's how I translated the question. Okay, so please go ahead.
Of course, economic success and success in elections are related. And Erdogan's achievement in politics have very much to do with his success in economy. But we cannot forget that the the person who is responsible for economy of the previous AK party governments was Ali Babacan himself. And when he is no longer with that portfolio and it went to somebody else, Turkish economy has lost its appetite, actually. Well, your question is valid. Of course, if AK party manages to regain the strength of the economy, it can also win in the elections. But this is not easy, because accepting the presidential system, Erdogan also accepted to put himself into getting at least 50% of the votes. In the latest election, he got 52% of the votes with the help of MHP. If the new parties will get minimum of 4 or 5% altogether, it means that AK party will not be successful in the next elections, and the coalitions will be in order. And the next president of Republic is not going to be Tayyip Erdogan, but somebody else who will get more than 50% of the votes. So it depends on many things, actually, and it is early to discuss this next election right now.
Okay, Aykan, you want to take on the CHP?
Very quickly, I think it would be fair to assume that CHP's first step as part of a coalition would be to move foreign policy from the palace, Erdogan's palace, to the foreign ministry, because the Turkish foreign ministry has been sidelined. Turkey still has, despite all the damage Erdogan years has done, Turkey still has a long list of competent diplomats, and they should be brought back into the foreign policy decision-making. Second, it's again fair to assume that CHP would turn to a more consultative foreign policy making, both at home and abroad. At home, this would mean consulting with coalition partners and others, more inclusive policy making. Abroad, it would mean re-engaging with allies within NATO, re-engaging with member states within the Council of Europe, re-engaging with the European Union as part of the membership process. And the third issue is, again, it's fair to assume, you can bet your money on this, there will be much less of what some call pan-Islamist and what others call neo-Ottoman policies of today. You know, a CHP Turkey would be more interested in reaching out to the world, not to the Muslim world alone. And all of these combined, I know the skeptics here would say that CHP does not have great transatlanticist credentials. So how do we expect the CHP to commit to the transatlantic alliance and values? And I would argue that it stems from a necessity, not necessarily out of pure values. And what I mean by that is this. I think increasingly not only CHP voters but others see that the anchor of democracy, secularism, rule of law and due process, and human rights in Turkey are the transatlantic institutions. Hence, as these institutions are an anchor to basically right to life and property in Turkey, CHP, as part of a coalition, would be in strong self-interest of the CHP leadership to anchor Turkey once again in these institutions. So even if you're skeptical about CHP's transatlanticist credentials, you should not be skeptical about the self-interest of such a ruling coalition. And again, we owe that to Erdogan. If today's Erdogan regime had not destroyed rights and freedoms in Turkey, has not destroyed people's lives, their right to life, right to property, right to inheritance, right to free speech, in such a disastrous manner, the need for transatlantic anchors wouldn't have been felt so strongly. But I think today even the Eurosceptics and NATO skeptics feel that if they are to have a life, besides anything else, just the right to life in Turkey, it needs these anchors. So that's my prediction.
Okay, and Rushan, you.
The perception that Tayyip Erdogan will never lose any election is really very popular among opposition. I think that this perception really helps him to win, to survive, but we already witnessed in 2015 June election when AK Party lost the unique party government. And then the last election of the municipal election, it showed that Tayyip Erdogan might be really might lose. So that the opposition should first beat this perception, and I think that this is really an urban how is called this urban legend of Turkey. Tayyip Erdogan already lost several elections, and I think that he will lose the future election too.
Okay, one more round, and I want to make sure that the people over there gets the opportunity. So I have, Jerry, I have to ask, 5 minutes, sorry, you don't want to ask a question. So there, and the gentleman there, and here, yeah, go ahead.
I am Abdülhamit Bilici, an exiled journalist. So my question is to Aykan and Giran. We are talking about the post-local elections. So we had the most important critical development after post-election was the Syria operation of Turkey. And CHP supported this operation, which was a big disappointment, I guess, for the HDP, which was the only party not supporting this operation. So I like to learn from both of you what would be the impact of that operation and the positions of the parties in a possible election for the partnership that they have been very successful in both in Ankara and Istanbul. And the follow-up, I mean, not the second question, that's a follow-up. And why, looking from outside, I see that it was a big hope for Turkey to won both Istanbul and elections by the opposition. But I see that the opposition itself forget about that success and doesn't remember much. I mean, why? What is the reason for that? I mean, do we think that the Istanbul's reaction to AK Party candidate was because of the lack of municipal services, or it was a kind of referendum and the people voted against the ruling party? That's my question.
Okay,
Thank you.
please be very brief, and I want only one question and a short one. Okay. And you asked your short questions.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead, sir.
My name is Patrick Theros. I'm a retired American diplomat. I'll keep this question really short. President Erdogan seems determined to provoke an armed confrontation with Greece over the exclusive economic zone. Unfortunately, CHP appears to be backing him up. Where are we going on this?
Okay, great. And there was Paolo short, and then the gentleman over there.
Thank you very much. My name is Paolo von Schirach, Global Policy Institute in Bay Atlantic University. On the issue at hand here of the Turkish incursion into Syria, this has caused, as all of us know, a refugee issue within Syria. In other words, we're talking in the Western media at least 200,000 to 300,000 people displaced within Syria. Does that have any resonance in Turkey at all? Of course, it has been played out very much in the Western media. President Erdogan is isolated at the NATO summit and all that. Does that make any difference, the fact that things, instead of targeting the terrorists, this has caused a bigger problem or not? Thank you.
Okay, and one more question in the back. Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much. My name is Narek Seferian. I'm a PhD student at Virginia Tech School of Public and International Affairs. I wanted to briefly question this notion of post-populist politics in Turkey, and seeing Mr. Imamoglu's campaign, the discourse, I was wondering if the kind of anti-elitism that was a part of that process, if it wouldn't be fair to see one kind of populism being replaced by another kind of populism.
Okay, and very brief 1-minute answers, please.
Should I go? Okay.
Yeah, go.
Well, let me quickly say this then. The CHP and the Turkish opposition was, in the local elections, was given a winning formula. In practice, everyone saw that this was a winning formula. And I can only say, and I hope ICANN will forgive me, that the CHP hasn't been or isn't used to winning too much. And I think we saw this after the local elections as well. Rather than basking in the glory that was achieved on that day, I think the CHP went backwards again and reneged on a lot of the rhetoric and discourse that it was able to provide the people in the run-up to the local elections. And I think when it comes to the Kurdish issue, because, as I said earlier in my presentation as well, that this is part of the DNA of the Republic of Turkey, when the CHP faces this issue as well, it's going to have to face its own DNA too. And I believe that this is a bit of an internal process for the CHP, something that we can maybe provide some vision or arguments on our side. But I wish, because I know ICANN and I know where his heart lies, I wish people like him every bit of success inside the CHP to try and transform the CHP into a real social democratic alternative for Turkey.
Great. ICANN?
Very quickly, when it comes to, and I'll try to combine a couple of questions together, the issue of nationalism, when it comes to Syria operation, when it comes to Kurdish question within Turkey, when it comes to Greece and Eastern Med, when it comes to populism, it is always a challenge not only for the CHP, which has its own factions. CHP does have a neo-nationalist faction as well as a kind of a more liberal, kind of progressive wing, but also across the Turkish political spectrum, it is also a burning issue. Plus, it's not only a burning issue intellectually, but also legally, because you can very easily be criminalized today as a politician, whether in the CHP, whether in the E Party, whether in the HDP, hence everyone. So it's easier to speak about these issues here, but we shouldn't do injustice to colleagues who can be jailed the next day for doing the right thing or saying the right thing. So there is that issue. Second, never underestimate Erdogan. Erdogan plays these nationalist cards really well, as he has demonstrated with the cross-border operation into Syria. But at the same time, he plays across the political spectrum. Watch what happened to Turkey's pro-secular, center-left daily Cumhuriyet. It has had a transformation. What we term, it has been taken by kind of more neo-nationalist left, as opposed to kind of more liberal left. Hence, Erdogan plays the game full court, makes it extremely difficult politically and legally to play a different game when it comes to the Kurdish issue, when it comes to other issues. So my way out of this is this. For the Kurdish question to be settled, for the issue of nationalism to be settled, the plane needs two wings. CHP, or Turkey's center-left, can't do it alone. It requires a brave and committed center-right partner. If CHP is not alone in articulating these issues, if there is a center-right party, I'm assuming maybe Babacan left center-right party, who is willing to take the same risk as the CHP, who makes the playing field safe, who makes it more legitimate to talk about different ways of engaging Kurds in Turkey and in the region, different ways of engaging Armenia, different ways of engaging Greece and Cyprus, different ways of engaging the Eastern Mediterranean energy issues, then I think there might be a way forward.
Shan, there was a question on the refugee.
Yeah, about the Syria, unfortunately, just after the election, Erdogan used the card of Syria and launched the operation, and except HDP, all the opposition gathered around Erdogan and supported the Syria operation. So there is, we didn't witness any, we didn't see any harsh critics about what was happening in Syria. But it doesn't took too much. I think that just after the operation is finished. Turkish army said that it is still going on, but there is no more operation. And so I don't think that this Erdogan can use anymore this Syria card. But during this short period of operation, the Turkey, except the HDP and some small group of intellectuals, they gathered about this nationalist, so-called nationalist cause about this fighting terrorism in Syria, but it took a short time, and I think that it's finished, and we came back again to the reality of Turkish economy.
Well, thank you, and this is the end for the domestic panel. Join me in thanking our panelists, and then we're ready for the keynote address.